Well, I intend this to be an interactive sermon, so please join in. Feel free to, yell amen, hallelujah, raise your hands. No heckling, please. Okay. For most people, Memorial Day is just another flag-waving holiday, like the 4th of July, Flag Day, Labor Day. It marks the beginning of summer. Can I get a hallelujah for that, anybody?
Hallelujah.
Okay.
Hallelujah.
It's the weekend of the Indy 500. If you enjoy watching cars go around and around and around for 500 miles. School's out. Many people have mixed feelings about that. The pools are open. Even if the weather is cold enough that it turns your lips blue, you still have to at least go stick your toe in the pool, right? It provides the first real chance for picnics, grillings, and of course, an outing to Cutty's. How about another hallelujah for that?
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
All right, Memorial Day hasn't always been that way, though. Memorial Day grew out of the need to remember where we've been. The need to remember is why we save photos and letters and trophies and little bits of ribbon and hundreds of other little knick-knacky things that we keep. What things do you guys treasure? Do you keep as a remembrance? Come on, I told you it's going to be interactive.
What do we keep?
Oh, I'll say yearbooks since I'm a yearbook salesman, so.
Oh, okay, your books, that's a
Yeah.
good one, yeah.
Well-
Look back and say, oh Lord, I had hair back then.
Exactly.
Well, since it's Memorial Day, I think we keep lots of memories of our loved ones. And we have, of course, like he said, yearbook, old photos and stuff that's kind of fun to look back into. Mhm.
Well, one of the reasons that we keep those things is to help us remember the past, because that gives us a better view of where we are now and maybe gives us a little idea of where we might be headed in the future. Well, the cherished memories of a nation, of a people, of a church, of an individual are the dreams that one generation passes on to the next. Forgetting to share with the next generation means dropping the torch, as does failing to learn from the previous generation. Now, we as a nation have often failed to pass the torch or failed to pick up the torch. We have repeated the same mistakes over and over again. And one of the lessons that we fail to learn is the human cost of war. This was a staggering thing. I did this. An estimated 1,255,500 U.S. military personnel have died on active duty. That is including during the Civil War. This Memorial Day weekend is a time set aside to remember those who have died during active duty. And Memorial Day unofficially began during the Civil War when a group of women got together and decorated the graves of those men who had bravely given their lives during that conflict. Now, I'm sure that similar thoughts were on the mind of the President Abraham Lincoln on November 19th, 1863, when he made his way to a Pennsylvania battlefield. He feared, and rightly so, that he might well be the very last president of the United States of America. The country teetered on the brink of self-destruction. It could easily have become ununited and become only a confederation of allied nations, separate states. Well, the ceremony that afternoon was to dedicate the site of a cemetery for the over 3,500 Union soldiers that had been killed in Gettysburg during that 3-day conflict the previous July. However, the toll was much higher than that. When you add in the loss of the Confederate soldiers, there was over 40,000 American soldiers died in or because of wounds suffered during that battle. And though it's short, his speech that day is well remembered in spite of what he said. He said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedication a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that country might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they have done here. It is for us a living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government by the people, of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln's remarks provided the seedbed for what would later become Memorial Day. Memorial Day was set up to honor, as I said, those who struggled and gave their last full measure of devotion. Over the years, many memorials have been erected to honor a person or persons who have died. I visited the memorials and cemeteries in and around Washington, D.C. The row upon row of white crosses standing in military precision at Arlington was an overwhelming experience. At the Vietnam Memorial, as I was standing and reading the names that are etched into the granite, I noticed my own reflection in that polished surface. And I have no words to describe the flood of feelings that came over me at that. Because though I was never in combat, I did serve in the Army during that war. What memorials have you visited? Again, it's interactive.
Well, we went down last weekend and visited my folks' graves, and my dad had served in World War II. If we'd gone on across the road to the older section of the cemetery, I would have seen my grandparents' graves and great-grandparents. I had one grandfather that did serve in the Civil War.
So what was your takeaway? What was your reaction to going to the cemetery?
All these people and that we loved are now with God.
Gone before us. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay. Well, this is a worship service. So let us think for a moment of the memorials to Jesus Christ. What more memorials to Jesus can you think of?
Well, we have a cross sitting here on the counter. We have churches.
Okay.
Communion.
Communion. That's the one that I thought of. I mean, because we are commanded in that to remember. That is what the communion is about. So what is it that we remember? We remember the miracles that he did. What miracle sticks out in your mind? What's the
Walking on water.
walking on water, changing water to wine? The first one.
How he broke the bread and had the fish for 5,000.
Yeah. Take a little boy's lunch and feed 5,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
and have 12 baskets of food left over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Turn the water into wine.
Raising the dead.
Raising the dead,
Mm-hmm.
healing,
Healing.
helping the
Yes.
deaf to hear, the blind to see, the lame to walk again.
Yeah.
Remember his lessons on how to live. What life lessons have you learned?
Be kind to others as he was to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Treat others like you like to be treated.
Yeah. He also had several parables that he said, they start off as the kingdom of heaven is like, and he never gave a physical description of what heaven was like. He didn't say there's streets of gold and pearly gates and stuff. He talked about how people reacted with each other. Remember his promises. One of my favorite promises is where I am,
You will be
also. We will be reunited with him. I'll send a helper. You know, if I go, I will send a comforter to you. The Holy Spirit. Bless you. Okay, remember his betrayal by the religious authorities. You remember that illegal trial that took place at night? When that was not good. How about the people who betrayed him? Judas, we always think of Judas as being the betrayer. But if you think about it, they all betrayed him.
Yes.
They all deserted him.
No one stood up for his defense.
No. Famously, Peter denied him 3 times. But unless we start to get smug about that, let's not forget that the scriptures also say that all. Hello?
I think it must have been your speaker.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. It was your speaker. It was talking to us.
okay. That we all have fallen short of God's glory. We remember the humiliation of his beatings and the path that he took through the streets with the weight of the cross, the mocking crown of thorns that was put on him, the nails that pierced his hands and his feet. Remember the agonizing effort that it took for him to speak the few words that he spoke from the cross. You realize that because of the way that they were crucified, most of the people didn't die from blood loss or shock. They died from asphyxiation because they couldn't breathe in. And here he spoke from the cross, which means he had to be pulling himself up with the nails in his hands and pushing up with his nailed feet. And he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He told the one thief, "Today you will be with me in paradise." It was important to him to speak those words to that dying man. To his mother, he said, "Behold your son." And to John, he said, "Behold your mother." And of course, then he did cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then, very human, he said, "I thirst. It is finished. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." But it didn't end there. Remember his triumph over the grave. Remember his final words, the very last commandment to his followers after the resurrection and just before he ascended into heaven. He said, "So wherever you go in the world, tell everyone the good news. And always remember that he did it all for you and for me." So now let us remember through Holy Communion by receiving the bread and the cup. Please join in the prayer of confession.